September 15, 1944. 0830 hours. Takara Ridge, Northern Saipan. Sergeant Major Kazuo Tanaka pressed his field glasses against the firing slit of his reinforced concrete bunker and smiled grimly as he watched the lumbering silhouettes of American Sherman tanks struggling through the coral debris field 800 meters below. The 42-year-old veteran of Manchuria and China adjusted his focus, counting 12 M4A2 medium tanks attempting to navigate the deliberately engineered killing zone his engineers had spent 3 months perfecting. They send their iron boxes against mountains of coral and caves of stone, he transmitted to his company commander, Captain Hideaki Matsumoto, unable to suppress the confidence in his voice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Americans believe their machines can conquer what nature and Japanese engineering have made impregnable. Behind Tanaka's position, 73 interconnected defensive positions carved into volcanic rock and reinforced with steel and concrete bristled with 47mm anti-tank guns, Type 96 machine guns, and mines capable of disabling any armored vehicle. Below them, a maze of coral ridges, 20-foot vertical walls, deep anti-tank ditches, and concealed explosive charges created terrain that military engineers had declared impossible for armored operations. What Tanaka didn't know, what none of the 3,400 Japanese defenders entrenched across Takara Ridge could have imagined, was that they were witnessing the debut of tactics that would systematically dismantle the defensive doctrine Japan had perfected across dozens of Pacific islands. Within 48 hours, those Sherman tanks, dismissed as helpless iron coffins trapped in impossible terrain, would breach defenses engineered specifically to stop them, using innovations and combined arms tactics that would rewrite the rules of island warfare. The Americans weren't trying to drive tanks through coral mountains. They were turning tanks into mobile artillery platforms, bunker-busting siege engines, and infantry support weapons that could fire point-blank into cave systems while absorbing punishments that would have destroyed any other vehicle. The seemingly impregnable fortress was about to discover that American industrial ingenuity and tactical flexibility could conquer what Japanese military engineering had declared unconquerable. By mid-1944, Japanese defensive strategy in the Pacific had evolved into a sophisticated doctrine of depth defense using natural terrain enhanced by extensive engineering. The catastrophic losses of 1943, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Kwajalein, had taught Imperial headquarters that beach defenses alone couldn't stop American amphibious assaults backed by overwhelming naval gunfire. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Colonel Takeshi Takeda, commander of the 135th Infantry Regiment, had pioneered the new defensive concept on Biak Island in May 1944. His tactical manual, distributed throughout Japanese Pacific garrisons, represented the culmination of defensive thinking. The enemy relies on armor for offensive momentum. Remove this advantage through terrain selection and engineering. Coral ridges, volcanic rock, and cave systems provide natural anti-tank barriers. Enhance these with deliberate obstacles, ditches, wall sections, explosive cratering, to create zones where armor cannot operate. Force infantry to attack without tank support. In this environment, our prepared positions and superior close-quarters fighting spirit will prevail. Sergeant Major Tanaka had implemented Takeda's doctrine with meticulous precision. Takara Ridge, a 400-meter-high coral and volcanic rock formation, featured natural defenses that seemed designed by military engineers. Vertical cliff faces rose 15 to 30 meters, creating impassable barriers for any tracked vehicle. The approaches consisted of jumbled coral boulders the size of automobiles, interspersed with deep crevasses and unstable rubble that would throw tank tracks. But nature's defenses were only the foundation. Tanaka's engineering platoon, commanded by Lieutenant Kenji Watanabe, had spent 12 weeks enhancing them. They excavated 27 interconnected cave positions, each reinforced with timber supports and concrete facings. They carved firing positions with interlocking fields of fire covering every approach. They constructed 8 reinforced concrete pillboxes with walls 4 feet thick, designed to withstand direct hits from naval artillery. The anti-tank defenses were particularly sophisticated. Watanabe's engineers had created a three-layer system. First, 200 meters from the main defensive line, they excavated anti-tank ditches 12 feet deep and 15 feet wide, dimensions calculated to trap any Sherman attempting to cross. Second, they positioned 47mm Type 1 anti-tank guns in carefully camouflaged positions with clear fields of fire across the approach routes. Third, they buried hundreds of aerial bombs and artillery shells as improvised mines, connected to command detonation points. Lieutenant Watanabe's engineering report, filed in August 1944, reflected absolute confidence. The defensive preparations at Takara Ridge represent the ideal implementation of Colonel Takeda's fortress doctrine. The terrain is naturally impassable to armor. Our engineering enhancements make it absolutely so. American tanks that attempt to approach our positions face three choices: become trapped in anti-tank ditches, be destroyed by our guns while negotiating impossible terrain, or be immobilized by mines and explosive craters. In all cases, they become stationary targets for our artillery. The ridge cannot be taken by armored assault. It can only be reduced by prolonged infantry attacks that will inflict unsustainable casualties on the enemy. Captain Matsumoto, the company commander, shared this assessment. His defensive plan, approved by regimental headquarters, assumed American armor would be neutralized by terrain, allowing Japanese infantry to defeat American infantry in prepared positions where Bushido's spirit and willingness to fight to the death would prove decisive. American tank crews approaching Takara Ridge that September morning understood the limitations of their vehicles better than anyone. The M4 Sherman medium tank, despite its success in North Africa and Europe against German armor, faced unique challenges in Pacific Island warfare. Staff Sergeant Michael Kozlowski, commanding a Sherman from C Company, 3rd Tank Battalion, had fought on Tarawa and Saipan. His assessment of Pacific tank operations, recorded in a letter home in July 1944, was brutally honest. The Sherman wasn't designed for this kind of fighting. In Europe, tanks fight tanks across open terrain. Here, we're not fighting enemy armor, we're fighting terrain that wants to kill us. Coral tears up our tracks. Volcanic rock throws our treads. The islands are all ridges and cliffs where tanks can't climb. Our 75mm gun is perfect for shooting other tanks at 1,000 yards. But here, we're trying to shoot into caves and bunkers at 50 yards. It's the wrong tool for the wrong job. The technical challenges were numerous. Sherman tanks weighed 33 tons, distributed across tracks designed for European soil, not Pacific coral that could cut through steel track links like a saw. The suspension system, adequate for rolling terrain, struggled with the vertical step-ups common in volcanic island topography. A Sherman could climb a 60% grade on soil but would throw tracks attempting to scale a 4-foot vertical coral step. The 75mm M3 gun, while effective against German tanks, had limitations against fortified positions. High explosive shells lacked the penetrating power to breach thick concrete pillboxes. The standard ammunition load, 71 rounds per tank, was optimized for tank versus tank engagement ranges of 800 to 2,000 yards, not point-blank bunker destruction. Visibility from inside a closed Sherman was severely limited. The driver peered through a small periscope. The tank commander had 5 vision blocks providing a total field of view of about 90 degrees, adequate for spotting enemy tanks at distance but dangerously inadequate when trying to identify camouflaged cave positions at 50 meters. Pacific tank crews fought in a claustrophobic world where the enemy was invisible until already firing. Most critically, Sherman tanks in Pacific operations faced an enemy that had no armor to worry about shooting. Japanese defenders could focus 100% of their effort on destroying American tanks without concern for enemy armor fire. Every position could be optimized for anti-tank work. Every gun could be loaded with armor-piercing ammunition. Every ambush could be designed to exploit the Sherman's vulnerabilities. First Lieutenant James Harrison, commanding 1st Platoon, C Company, wrote in his combat diary, "We're not fighting a tank war here. We're fighting an infantry support war in terrain designed to kill tanks. The Japanese know it. They've turned every island into a tank death trap. Our boys are brave, but bravery doesn't help when your tank is stuck in a coral ditch while Japanese soldiers drop satchel charges on your engine deck. We need different tactics or different tanks. Probably both. The initial assault on Takara Ridge began at 0645 hours on September 15 with a 45-minute naval bombardment from 3 destroyers and 2 cruisers. Sergeant Major Tanaka and his men sheltered deep in their caves while 5-inch and 8-inch shells hammered the ridge's surface, throwing up geysers of coral dust and shattered rock. When the bombardment lifted at 0730, Tanaka emerged to assess damage. The surface positions, deliberately expendable decoys, had been obliterated. But the deep caves and reinforced bunkers remained intact. His communication lines were functioning. His artillery observers were reporting American tanks forming up 2,000 meters east. Everything was proceeding as Doctrine predicted. At 0745, 12 M4A2 Shermans from C Company, 3rd Tank Battalion, began their approach, advancing in 2 columns with infantry from the 2nd Battalion, 27th Marines following in dispersed formation. Staff Sergeant Kozlowski's tank led the right column. His orders were straightforward: advance to the base of Takara Ridge. Support infantry assault on Japanese positions. Suppress enemy fire. What those orders didn't address was how to advance through 800 meters of terrain specifically engineered to stop tanks. The first 300 meters proceeded normally. The tanks navigated around coral boulders, staying on relatively clear paths that their reconnaissance had identified. Kozlowski, buttoned up inside his tank with limited visibility, relied on his driver, Private First Class Thomas McKenna, to navigate around obstacles. Then they hit the first deliberate obstacle belt. Lieutenant Watanabe's anti-tank ditch appeared without warning, a 15-foot wide chasm excavated across the entire approach route. The lead Sherman in the left column, commanded by Sergeant David Porter, attempted to cross and immediately nosed down, its front glassy plate tilting at 45 degrees as the tank dropped into the ditch. The vehicle was stuck, unable to reverse or advance, its 75mm gun pointing uselessly at the sky. Kozlowski's tank and 2 others from the right column attempted to flank around the ditch's northern end. They entered an area of jumbled coral boulders, natural terrain that seemed passable. 50 meters in, Kozlowski's Sherman threw its right track when the drive sprocket caught on a submerged coral projection. The 33-ton vehicle lurched to a halt, immobilized. While the crew frantically worked to repair the track, a process requiring them to exit the vehicle under fire, Japanese 47mm anti-tank guns opened up from concealed positions 400 meters upslope. The first round struck Sergeant Porter's trapped Sherman, penetrating the thinner side armor and causing a catastrophic ammunition explosion. Porter and his crew died instantly. The second round missed Kozlowski's immobilized tank by inches, ricocheting off a coral boulder with a shower of sparks. The third round struck another Sherman attempting to reverse away from the kill zone, punching through the engine deck and setting the engine compartment ablaze. That crew bailed out into a hail of machine gun fire. Only 2 of 5 crewmen made it to cover. In less than 3 minutes, 3 Shermans were destroyed and 1 immobilized. The remaining 8 tanks reversed rapidly, backing out of the engagement zone while Japanese artillery began falling among them. Lieutenant Harrison's after-action report, filed that afternoon, was grim: attempted direct assault on Takara Ridge positions. Encountered prepared anti-tank defenses, ditches, boulder fields, concealed guns. Lost 3 tanks destroyed, 1 immobilized and abandoned. No progress achieved. Japanese positions remain intact. Terrain makes conventional tank assault impossible. Request guidance. Sergeant Major Tanaka watched the American withdrawal with satisfaction. The engagement had proceeded exactly as Doctrine predicted. American tanks, trapped by terrain and engineering, had been destroyed without breaching the first defensive line. He transmitted to Captain Matsumoto, enemy armor attack repulsed. 3 tanks destroyed, 1 immobilized. No damage to our positions. The ridge remains secure. That evening, Lieutenant Harrison, Staff Sergeant Kozlowski, and Major Robert Dunlap, commanding 3rd Tank Battalion, conducted an urgent tactical conference. Dunlap, a veteran of armored warfare in North Africa who had transitioned to Pacific operations, understood they needed a fundamentally different approach. "Gentlemen, we're trying to fight a European tank battle on Pacific terrain," Dunlap began, spreading aerial reconnaissance photos across his field desk. "In Europe, tanks maneuver and engage enemy armor. Here, we're not fighting tanks, we're fighting fortifications. We need to stop thinking like tank commanders and start thinking like mobile artillery." Captain Raymond Mitchell, the infantry battalion commander, nodded agreement. "My Marines can't advance without armor support. But your tanks can't advance through that terrain without becoming targets. We're deadlocked." Kozlowski, still shaken from the day's losses, spoke up, "Sir, we don't need to drive through their defenses. We need to destroy them from positions where we can shoot but they can't kill us. Our 75mm gun has a maximum range of 15,000 yards. We're trying to fight at 50 yards where their anti-tank guns can kill us. Why not stand off at 500 to 800 yards and just blow their positions apart?" The comment sparked a revolutionary realization. Traditional tank doctrine emphasized maneuver and mobility, tanks advancing, flanking, penetrating enemy lines. But Pacific Island warfare offered no flanks to turn, no lines to penetrate. The Japanese weren't going to retreat. They would fight from fixed positions until killed. If Japanese defenders wouldn't come out of their fortifications, American tanks didn't need to maneuver. They needed to become siege artillery that could systematically reduce prepared positions while remaining outside the effective range of Japanese anti-tank weapons. Major Dunlap immediately began sketching a new tactical plan. Tanks would advance only to positions where they had clear fields of fire to Japanese fortifications but were beyond effective anti-tank gun range, approximately 600 to 800 meters. From these firing positions, tanks would become stationary gun platforms, pouring high explosive and white phosphorus shells into cave mouths, bunker firing slits, and trench systems. But the standard Sherman 75mm gun load was wrong for this mission. The typical combat load consisted of 65 armor-piercing rounds, designed to penetrate enemy tanks, and only 6 high-explosive rounds. For bunker destruction, they needed the opposite ratio, maximum high explosive with some white phosphorus for cave clearing. Dunlap radioed Division Headquarters, "Request priority ammunition resupply. Maximum high explosive and white phosphorus. Minimum armor piercing. Ratio 10 to 1. Also request engineering support, dozers, Bangalore torpedoes, demolition teams. We're converting from mobile armor to siege artillery operations." The tactical innovation went further. If tanks couldn't safely navigate the prepared obstacle belts, engineers would clear paths under covering fire from the siege position Shermans. If tanks couldn't climb vertical coral faces, engineers would build ramps using rubble and demolitions. If Japanese positions were invisible to tankers with limited visibility, infantry forward observers would direct fire. The new doctrine, later formally codified as fortress reduction tactics, represented a complete reimagining of tank employment. Shermans would no longer lead assaults. They would provide overwhelming firepower from hold-down positions while engineers and infantry did the dangerous close-in work. September 16, 05:30 hours. 9 M4A2 Shermans, the survivors from the previous day plus 3 replacements, moved into carefully selected firing positions on a coral ridge 750 meters from the base of Takara Ridge. Army engineers, working through the night under covering darkness, had prepared these positions, level platforms bulldozed from coral, with frontal berms providing protection for the tank holes while exposing only the turret. Each Sherman now carried a revised ammunition load, 8 armor-piercing rounds, 55 high-explosive rounds, and 8 white phosphorus rounds. The white phosphorus was critical. When fired into a cave or bunker, it created burning clouds that were both incendiary and psychologically devastating. Staff Sergeant Kozlowski, commanding the lead Sherman, had a new crew position, a Marine forward observer, Corporal James Lynch, who would ride on the tank's rear deck and direct fire against targets invisible to the tank crew. Lynch carried a radio, binoculars, and aerial reconnaissance photos marked with numbered Japanese positions. At 0600, Major Dunlap gave the order, "All tanks, commence bombardment." Sector A, positions 1 through 8. Fire for effect. 9 75mm guns opened fire simultaneously. The bombardment wasn't designed for accuracy, it was designed for volume and persistence. Each tank would fire 40 to 50 rounds over the next 3 hours, systematically working through the marked targets while infantry observers called corrections. Sergeant Major Tanaka, observing from his command bunker, watched the American tanks fire from protected positions far beyond effective anti-tank gun range. This wasn't an assault, it was an artillery bombardment using direct-fire weapons. His 47mm guns couldn't reach them. His mortars lacked the precision for counter-battery fire against armored targets. His men could only shelter in their caves while high-explosive shells hammered the ridge. The effect of sustained 75mm bombardment exceeded anyone's expectations. While a single high-explosive shell couldn't penetrate 4 feet of reinforced concrete, 40 shells hitting the same bunker embrasure would eventually collapse the structure. Cave mouths that seemed invulnerable to artillery fire could be sealed by dozens of shells triggering coral collapses at the entrance. Machine gun positions protected by log and earth parapets were obliterated by concentrated fire. More importantly, the white phosphorus rounds proved devastating. Corporal Lynch would identify a cave entrance, call the coordinates to Kozlowski, and the Sherman would pump 3 to 4 WP rounds into the opening. The burning phosphorus filled the cave with toxic smoke and fragments that burned at 5,000 degrees. Japanese soldiers had 3 choices: suffocate in the smoke, burn from the phosphorus, or flee the cave into machine gun fire. By 1,000 hours, the character of the battle had changed fundamentally. The Japanese weren't fighting mobile tanks they could ambush and destroy. They were enduring a siege where American tanks, positioned beyond retaliation range, systematically demolished prepared positions with firepower that never stopped. By 1400 hours on September 16, the American Shermans had fired over 360 rounds of 75mm ammunition into Takara Ridge, more ordnance than the Japanese defenders had experienced in any single day of combat. The psychological effect was as devastating as the physical destruction. Private First Class Hiroshi Yamada, sheltering in a cave complex on the ridge's eastern face, recorded the experience in his diary, recovered after the battle. The American tanks fire without stopping. Not like artillery that comes in barges then stops. These guns fire continuously, all day. One explosion, then another, then another. The cave shakes. Coral dust fills the air until we cannot breathe. We cannot see the tanks to shoot back, they are too far away and hidden behind earth. We can only wait and pray the next shell does not collapse our cave. Men are going mad from the constant explosions. Sergeant Major Tanaka faced a crisis his training had never addressed. The fortress doctrine assumed American tanks would attempt to assault the positions, where they could be destroyed by prepared defenses. But these tanks weren't assaulting, they were conducting a siege from positions his weapons couldn't reach. He transmitted a situation report to Captain Matsumoto at 1,500 hours. Enemy armor maintains bombardment from positions 700 to 800 meters distance. Our anti-tank guns cannot engage at this range. Request artillery support to suppress enemy tanks. Surface positions taking severe damage. 5 cave entrances collapsed. Casualties mounting from shell fragments and cave collapses. Morale deteriorating under sustained fire. Matsumoto's response offered no solution, no artillery available, all guns engaged suppressing enemy landing zones. You must hold position with available weapons. The Americans will eventually assault. Destroy them when they close to effective range. But the Americans had no intention of closing to effective range. At 1,600 hours, Major Dunlap rotated 3 fresh Shermans into firing positions, relieving 3 tanks that had expended their ammunition. The siege bombardment continued without pause. Japanese defenders, expecting the firing to stop at nightfall as traditional artillery barges did, were shocked when the shelling continued after dark, Sherman gunners using tracer rounds to walk fire onto memorized target coordinates. While tanks pounded Japanese positions, Army engineers implemented the second phase of the new tactics. Under covering fire from the Shermans, demolition teams advanced toward the anti-tank obstacles that had stopped the first assault. Staff Sergeant William Bull Henderson commanded the 3rd Platoon, 23rd Engineer Combat Battalion. His mission was straightforward but extremely dangerous: clear a tank-width path through the anti-tank ditch and boulder field while under fire from Japanese positions on the ridge. Henderson's solution combined old siege warfare principles with modern demolitions. His engineers filled burlap sandbags with crushed coral, creating portable fill material. Under cover of darkness on the night of September 16 to 17, his platoon crawled forward to the anti-tank ditch carrying 200 sandbags and Bangalore torpedoes, explosive-filled pipes used to clear obstacles. The work was brutally physical and terrifyingly exposed. Engineers would crawl to the ditch edge, lower sandbags on ropes, crawl back for more bags, and repeat. Japanese machine gunners, unable to see clearly in darkness but aware of American activity, fired at sounds and muzzle flashes. 3 engineers were killed in the first hour. Henderson himself was wounded by shrapnel but refused evacuation. By 0400 hours, his platoon had created a crude ramp across the 15-foot ditch, not strong enough for normal traffic, but potentially passable for a 33-ton Sherman if the approach was perfect. The boulder field required different tactics. Henderson's men placed 50-pound Bangalore torpedoes among the jumbled coral, creating explosive breaches that would topple unstable boulders and clear passages. At 0530 on September 17, Henderson radioed Major Dunlap, "Path is prepared. Not perfect, but passable. Recommend single-file advance. Slow speed. 1 tank at a time. If the first tank makes it, others can follow." Lieutenant Harrison, commanding the lead Sherman platoon, received his orders with mixed feelings. The previous assault had cost 3 tanks. Now he was being asked to drive across an engineer-built ramp over a 15-foot ditch while Japanese guns waited. "This is either brilliant or suicidal," he muttered to his driver. "Probably both. Let's go." At 0600 hours, Harrison's Sherman, now carrying the radio call sign Iron Horse 1, began its approach. The tank moved at walking speed, carefully following the path Henderson's engineers had marked with white tape. Behind Harrison, 8 more Shermans waited in column, maintaining 50-meter spacing. From his bunker, Sergeant Major Tanaka watched the American armor begin moving again. After 36 hours of bombardment that had collapsed multiple cave positions and killed or wounded over 40 men, Japanese defensive strength was severely degraded. But his 47mm anti-tank guns were still operational, concealed and waiting. "Let them come close," Tanaka transmitted to his gun positions. "Wait until they cross the ditch. Wait until they are committed and cannot reverse. Then destroy them." Harrison's Sherman reached the anti-tank ditch at 0612 hours. Henderson's improvised ramp looked even more precarious from inside a tank than it had in the pre-dawn darkness. The coral-filled sandbags formed a 30-degree slope down into the ditch, then a steeper 40-degree slope up the far side. If the ramp collapsed under the Sherman's weight, the tank would be trapped, a stationary target. "Driver, take it slow and steady," Harrison ordered. "Don't stop. Momentum is everything." Private McKenna, the driver, engaged low gear and approached the ramp. The Sherman's nose dipped as the front track plates bit into the sandbag ramp. The entire vehicle tilted forward at an alarming angle. For 3 eternal seconds, the tank teetered on the edge, and then the tracks gripped and pulled the Sherman down into the ditch and up the far side. "We're across," McKenna shouted. The ramp held. Tanaka, watching through field glasses, realized the tactical situation had shifted catastrophically. The Americans had breached his primary obstacle belt. The second Sherman was already crossing the ditch. In minutes, multiple tanks would be within effective range of his positions, but now his guns would be engaging armor that was moving and alert, not trapped and helpless as the previous day. He gave the order, "All anti-tank guns, engage targets as they cross the obstacle line. Priority to lead tanks." The first 47mm round fired at 0615 hours, striking Harrison's Sherman on the frontal glacis plate. The Japanese armor-piercing round, fired from 300 meters, punched into the sloped armor, but the angle of impact caused the shell to ricochet upward without penetrating. Harrison's tank absorbed the hit with barely a tremor. "We're hit, no penetration," Harrison reported. "Gunner, identify firing position." He round, load. His gunner, Corporal Danny Fisher, had already spotted the muzzle flash. Target identified, 300 meters, base of ridge, bunker embrasure. Loading he. Fire. The 75mm gun roared. The high-explosive shell struck directly into the narrow bunker firing slit, a nearly impossible shot at 300 meters but aided by the fact that the Japanese gun had just revealed its position by firing. The explosion inside the confined concrete space killed the entire gun crew instantly. Behind Harrison, the 2nd and 3rd Shermans crossed the ditch successfully. Now 3 American tanks were inside the primary defensive belt, with 6 more crossing behind them. The tactical equation that had favored Japanese defenders, tanks trapped in killing zones, had reversed. Now mobile American armor was operating inside Japanese defensive positions at ranges where Sherman guns could devastate prepared fortifications. What followed over the next 4 hours demonstrated the evolution of American combined arms tactics to near perfection. The advance wasn't a tank charge, it was a carefully orchestrated integration of armor, infantry, engineers, and supporting fires. Sherman tanks advanced in pairs, separated by 50 meters. Each tank had a Marine rifle squad following 30 meters behind, using the Sherman's bulk as mobile cover. When a tank spotted a Japanese position, it would halt in a hold-down position and suppress the target with direct fire while the infantry squad maneuvered to assault position. Staff Sergeant Kozlowski's tank demonstrated the tactic at 0745 hours when approaching a Japanese pillbox that had survived 2 days of bombardment. The reinforced concrete structure, built into the base of a coral cliff, had walls 4 feet thick and a firing embrasure only 8 inches high, nearly impervious to artillery fire. Kozlowski positioned his Sherman 75 meters from the pillbox, close enough for accurate direct fire but far enough that Japanese infantry couldn't easily attack with satchel charges. His gunner, Corporal Eddie Walsh, fired 5 high-explosive rounds directly into the narrow embrasure at point-blank range. The shells didn't penetrate the thick walls, but the repeated impacts and concussions inside the confined space stunned the Japanese defenders. While the pillbox was suppressed, Sergeant Jake Morrison's Marine rifle squad advanced along the cliff face, approaching the pillbox from its blind side. 2 Marines placed satchel charges, 20-pound explosive packs, against the pillbox's rear wall. The detonation blew a 3-foot hole through the concrete. Marines poured rifle fire through the breach, then rushed the position. The coordination required split-second timing and constant communication. Morrison carried a radio connecting him directly to Kozlowski. "Iron Horse 3, this is Marine 16. We're in position for breach. Cease fire on the embrasure. We're blowing the back wall in 5 seconds. Marine 16, Iron Horse 3. Roger. Ceasing fire. We'll cover your assault." The satchel charges detonated. Marines stormed through the breach. 30 seconds later, Morrison radioed, "Iron Horse 3, position secured. 8 enemy Kia. Moving to next objective." This tactic, tank suppression fire enabling infantry assault, followed by immediate advance to the next position, allowed American forces to systematically reduce Japanese defenses that had been engineered to be impregnable. The key was that Sherman tanks no longer tried to defeat fortifications alone. They provided the mobile firepower that enabled infantry to close with and destroy positions. At 1030 hours, a new weapon entered the battle that would become synonymous with Pacific Island warfare, the Sherman flamethrower tank, designated M4A2 with the E4-5 flamethrower system. 3 of these specialized Shermans had been attached to the assault force specifically for cave warfare. The flamethrower replaced the hull-mounted machine gun with a flame projector capable of shooting burning napalm 150 yards. The psychological and physical effects were devastating. First Lieutenant Raymond Briggs commanded the lead flamethrower tank, callsign Zippo-1. His mission was cave clearance, exactly the problem that had stymied conventional tactics. Japanese defenders in deep caves could survive artillery bombardment, then emerge to fire on advancing infantry. Traditional assaults required infantry to advance directly into cave entrances under point-blank fire, a suicidal proposition. Briggs' flamethrower Sherman offered a different solution. At 1,045 hours, he approached a cave complex that had resisted 2 days of bombardment. Intelligence estimated 30 to 50 Japanese soldiers sheltered inside the interconnected tunnels. Conventional assault would cost dozens of American casualties. Zippo-1 in position, Briggs radioed. Preparing to engage cave system. All infantry fall back 100 meters. His gunner, Sergeant Hector Rodriguez, aimed a flame projector at the cave's 10-foot-wide entrance. Ready to fire, Lieutenant. Fire. The flamethrower erupted with a distinctive roar, different from artillery or small arms, a rushing, whooshing sound like a massive blowtorch. A jet of burning napalm shot from the Sherman's hull, crossing 80 feet in 2 seconds and flooding into the cave entrance. The jellied gasoline adhered to rock surfaces, burning at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit while consuming all available oxygen. Inside the cave, the effect was apocalyptic. Private Yamada, who survived this particular attack by fleeing through a rear exit before the flames reached his position, later described it during interrogation. The fire came into the cave like a living thing. It crawled along the floor and walls, burning everything. The heat was so intense we couldn't breathe. Men's clothing caught fire. The smoke and flames filled the tunnel so completely that running toward the rear exit meant running through fire. Those who hesitated died. I ran through the flames and escaped. My back and arms were badly burned, but I lived. 37 men in that cave died, burned, suffocated, or both. Briggs fired 4 3-second bursts over 2 minutes, pumping nearly 200 gallons of napalm into the cave system. When Marine infantry cautiously approached the cave entrance 15 minutes later, they found 37 Japanese bodies and 0 resistance. The cave system that would have required days to reduce by conventional assault had been neutralized in 2 minutes. The flamethrower tanks repeated this performance 7 more times that afternoon. By 1600 hours, 9 major cave complexes had been cleared with minimal American casualties. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese defenders was profound. There was no longer any position safe from American weapons. Not even the deepest caves offered sanctuary. By September 18, the defensive situation on Takara Ridge had become hopeless. Sergeant Major Tanaka's situation report to Captain Matsumoto at 0600 hours revealed the extent of the crisis: effective combat strength reduced to approximately 40%. 8 anti-tank gun positions destroyed. 12 cave systems collapsed or burned out. Communications with eastern flank lost. Enemy armor now operating freely within our defensive positions. Enemy flamethrower tanks have made cave defense untenable. Respectfully request permission to conduct organized withdrawal to secondary positions. Matsumoto's response reflected Japanese military doctrine: withdrawal is not authorized. Every man will hold his position and fight to the death. There will be no retreat. The Emperor expects your sacrifice. But military doctrine couldn't change tactical reality. American Shermans, now operating in groups of 3 to 4 inside the Japanese defensive perimeter, were systematically destroying every prepared position. The tanks that Japanese engineers had declared unable to penetrate the coral ridges were now climbing those ridges using engineer-built ramps, shooting into cave systems from ranges measured in meters, and crushing bunkers under their tracks. Private First Class Robert Jameson, a Marine rifleman advancing behind Kozlowski Sherman, witnessed the complete reversal of the defensive equation. The Japs built these positions to stop tanks. But we weren't using tanks the way they expected. Our Shermans weren't trying to race through their defenses, they were sitting 50 yards away and shooting cave systems until nothing could survive inside. Then we'd move up, clear the position with grenades and satchel charges, and the tanks would move to the next cave. It was slow, but it was absolutely effective. The Japs couldn't stop it. Their anti-tank guns were designed to shoot at moving tanks at 300 to 500 meters. Our tanks would sit still at 50 meters and just hammer away until the position was destroyed. At 1,100 hours, Tanaka made the decision that would end the battle. Recognizing that his force was being systematically annihilated with no possibility of inflicting meaningful casualties on the enemy, he ordered the surviving defenders to abandon the prepared positions and attempt infiltration through American lines under cover of darkness. This wasn't a tactical withdrawal, it was the dissolution of an organized defense. His final transmission to Captain Matsumoto was terse: "Position is no longer tenable." Approximately 180 men surviving. Breaking contact and attempting exfiltration. Takara Ridge is lost. The American tanks have conquered what we believed was unconquerable. Behind the tactical success lay industrial reality that Japanese commanders could barely comprehend. The American capacity to absorb losses and continue operations with undiminished strength defied Japanese experience. 3rd Tank Battalion had begun the Takara Ridge assault with 12 operational Shermans. After 3 days of combat, they had lost 5 tanks destroyed and 2 damaged beyond field repair. In European warfare, such losses would have represented a devastating blow requiring weeks to recover operational strength. Instead, by September 19, the day after the ridge was secured, the battalion had 14 operational Shermans. Replacement tanks arrived from the division reserve within 24 hours of losses being reported. Damaged tanks were evacuated to beach maintenance facilities where marine tank maintenance companies worked around the clock performing repairs. Staff Sergeant Kozlowski's tank had absorbed 3 direct hits from 47mm guns during the battle, none penetrating, all causing damage to external components. On the evening of September 18, a maintenance crew descended on his vehicle. By dawn on the 19th, the tank was fully repaired with new track sections, a replaced antenna mount, fresh paint covering the impact scars, and a full ammunition and fuel load. The ammunition resupply was equally impressive. The 9 Shermans firing throughout the battle had expended approximately 1,200 rounds of 75mm ammunition, an enormous expenditure requiring careful logistics. Ammunition ships arrived daily with fresh supplies trucked directly from beach depots to firing positions. American tanks never reduced fire due to ammunition shortages. Major Dunlap's post-battle report included an observation that would prove prophetic: the key to success was not tank superiority but operational sustainability. Japanese defenders built excellent fortifications and fought with incredible determination. But they could not sustain their defense against unlimited American firepower backed by industrial logistics that replaced every loss within hours. We won not because our tanks were better but because we could keep our tanks fighting without pause while Japanese defensive capabilities eroded under sustained pressure. The lessons from Takara Ridge spread rapidly through Marine Corps tank units. Within weeks, the tactics developed by Dunlap, Harrison, and Kozlowski were codified in official training manuals distributed throughout Pacific commands. The Marine Corps Equipment Board conducted a formal study of the battle in October 1944, producing a document titled Tactical Employment of Medium Tanks in Island Fortress Assault. The manual represented a complete break from pre-war tank doctrine. Tank units will not attempt to maneuver through fortified island defenses. Instead, tanks will establish siege positions outside effective enemy anti-tank range, 600 to 800 meters, and conduct sustained bombardment of enemy fortifications. Engineers will clear approach paths under covering fire from siege position tanks. Once breaches are created, tanks will advance in close coordination with infantry, providing direct fire support at point-blank range. Specialized flamethrower tanks will clear cave systems that resist conventional bombardment. The manual's ammunition recommendations reflected hard-won experience: standard Sherman combat load for Pacific operations, 8 AP, 55 He, 8 WP. Armor-piercing ammunition is minimized as anti-armor missions are rare. High explosive becomes primary ammunition. White phosphorus essential for cave warfare. Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Chesty Puller, legendary Marine infantry commander, observed the Takara Ridge assault and incorporated tank infantry coordination into his own tactical doctrine. Tanks and infantry must operate as integrated teams. Tanks provide mobile firepower that enables infantry to close with fortified positions. Infantry provides close security that prevents enemy from destroying tanks with satchel charges. Neither can succeed alone. Together, they're unstoppable. By November 1944, every Marine tank battalion in the Pacific had converted to the new doctrine. The results were immediate. Tank losses to enemy action dropped by 60% while effectiveness against fortifications increased dramatically. Battles that would have required weeks of grinding infantry assaults were concluded in days with Sherman tank support. Captured Japanese documents from late 1944 revealed the complete failure of fortress doctrine when facing the evolved American tactics. Colonel Takeda, the architect of Japanese defensive strategy, was captured on Iwo Jima in March 1945. His interrogation by Marine intelligence officers provided insight into Japanese thinking. We believed that island terrain and proper engineering could neutralize American armor advantage. We were correct that tanks could not maneuver through our fortifications. But we failed to anticipate that American doctrine would adapt. Their tanks stopped trying to maneuver. Instead, they became siege artillery that could destroy our positions from beyond our weapon range. Once they developed this tactic, our fortifications became death traps rather than strong points. We could not retreat, could not advance, could only shelter while American tanks systematically destroyed every position. Takeda continued, more significantly, American industrial capacity allowed them to sustain operations we could not match. We lost 5 anti-tank guns in 3 days. Those guns could never be replaced. We had no reserve, no production capacity to create more. Americans lost 7 tanks in 3 days. Within 24 hours, they had more tanks than they started with. This is not a battle we could win through defensive tactics. This is a battle we lost before it began because American industry could produce faster than we could destroy. The admission was repeated in Japanese war diaries and reports throughout late 1944 and 1945. Japanese defenders on Poliliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa all reported the same pattern. Elaborate fortifications that seemed impregnable to traditional assault were systematically reduced by Sherman tanks employing siege tactics, sustained firepower, and combined arms coordination. The statistics from Takara Ridge and subsequent Pacific Island battles told the story of American tactical evolution and Japanese defensive failure. At Takara Ridge, 3rd Tank Battalion lost 7 Shermans destroyed to enemy action over 4 days of combat. Japanese defenders lost their entire garrison, approximately 3,400 men, with fewer than 200 captured and the rest killed in combat. More significantly, the casualty exchange ratio for infantry changed dramatically. In the first assault on September 15, before siege tactics were implemented, Marine infantry suffered 47 casualties, 12 killed, 35 wounded, while advancing barely 200 meters. In the final assault on September 17-18th using coordinated tank infantry tactics, Marine casualties were 23, 6 killed, 17 wounded, while capturing the entire ridge complex. The Sherman tank, widely criticized in 1944 as inferior to German armor and poorly suited for Pacific warfare, had proven to be exactly the right weapon for island fortification reduction. Its 75mm gun provided sufficient firepower for bunker destruction. Its armor protected crews from all but the heaviest Japanese anti-tank weapons. Its mechanical reliability allowed sustained operations in tropical conditions. Most importantly, American industry could produce and replace them faster than Japan could destroy them. At the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia, a restored M4A2 Sherman from 3rd Tank Battalion sits in the Pacific War Gallery. The placard beside it summarizes the transformation. The M4 Sherman medium tank was not designed for Pacific Island warfare. Its European design emphasized tank versus tank combat across open terrain. But American tactical innovation adapted the Sherman to Pacific requirements. Tanks became siege artillery platforms, bunker destroyers, and mobile fortresses enabling infantry assault. The Japanese fortress doctrine, elaborate fortifications in difficult terrain, could not withstand sustained Sherman bombardment backed by American industrial logistics. Islands that Japanese engineers declared tank-proof were conquered by Sherman tanks that refused to fight the battle Japanese defenders expected. Below the placard is a quote from Sergeant Major Kazuo Tanaka, taken from his post-war memoir published in 1952. We were told American tanks could not operate in Pacific terrain. We were told our fortifications were impregnable to armored assault. We were told that island defense doctrine would create killing zones where American tanks would be destroyed before breaching our positions. All of this was true if American tanks fought the battle we expected. But they did not fight that battle. They fought a different war, a war of sustained firepower from protected positions, of coordinated tank infantry engineer operations, of unlimited ammunition and replacement vehicles. We built fortifications to stop tanks from advancing. They built tactics that didn't require tanks to advance. We engineered positions to survive bombardment. They conducted bombardments that never stopped until positions were destroyed. We could not believe that American Sherman tanks conquered our defenses. But believing was irrelevant. They conquered them regardless. The Japanese Imperial Army's post-war study, completed in 1946, concluded with brutal honesty: American Sherman tanks did not defeat Japanese island fortifications through superior armor or firepower. They defeated them through tactical adaptation, combined arms integration, and industrial sustainability. Japanese fortress doctrine was sound, but only against an enemy using pre-war tactics. Against an enemy willing to adapt doctrine to circumstances and backed by unlimited material resources, fortress defense proved futile. The Sherman tank conquered island defenses not by being invulnerable but by being numerous, supported, and employed in ways our doctrine never anticipated. By war's end, Sherman tanks had participated in every major Pacific Island campaign from the Gilberts through Okinawa. They destroyed thousands of Japanese fortifications, supported countless infantry assaults, and proved that American industrial capacity and tactical flexibility could overcome any defensive preparation. The Japanese soldiers who initially dismissed American tanks as helpless in island terrain learned the terrible truth: engineering could create obstacles, but sustained firepower backed by industrial logistics could overcome any obstacle given time. And in the Pacific War, America had both time and unlimited industrial capacity while Japan had neither. The bent-wing fighters conquered the air. The Sherman tanks conquered the land. Both did so not by being superior fighting machines in traditional metrics, but by being deployed in ways that made traditional metrics irrelevant. The war had changed. American military adaptation and industrial might ensured that no defensive doctrine, no matter how sound theoretically, could long survive contact with an enemy that refused to fight the expected battle.